Carrie, and today I want to talk about the brain. I'm going to share a little bit about how the brain works and how you can think about the brain a little differently in terms of parenting your kids, and why it's important to think about the brain when you're parenting your kids. It's kind of a new perspective on things, but I think once you hear it, it helps make a lot of sense in regards to understanding why your children are behaving the way they're behaving and why it's sometimes challenging for you when they're behaving that way. So let's get started. I have learned about the brain from a gentleman by the name of Dr. Dan Siegel, and the way he teaches the brain is he uses his hand as a model. And basically, my understanding of it is that you can use your hand to see how there's three main parts of the brain. And each part has a very different set of behaviors that show up when we're in that part of the brain, and they need to be cared for very differently. So let's go from the bottom up, because that's how it develops. First, you've got the brainstem, and the brainstem is where our fight or flight response is. It's the part of our brain that's really concerned with our survival. And that's all in here. So this is your spinal cord, and then up in here is your reptile brain. So it's all about the part of the brain that wants to make sure you're safe. So then when you fold in your thumb, that's your limbic system, and that's what we call the mammal brain. And that part of the brain is all about expressing emotions and connection. So that part of the brain is really the part of the brain that comes online in the first year of life, when a baby is trying to make sense of the world and express themselves before they have the use of language, and also really that sense of connection that they develop with their primary caregivers. And then what comes around here is our neocortex. This is this part of the brain, and that's all about our rational thinking and the way that we make sense of the world, and our ability to empathize with others, and our ability to stay relatively balanced. And in the long term, in the big picture, this part of the brain, our human part of the brain, really tends to ultimately, it's going to help manage the whole system, but that takes quite a few years before that happens. So when children are young, what's happening is that they're building this whole system. When the baby's born, the brain isn't wired. Only about a quarter of the brain is really connected. There's all these billions upon billions of neurons, but there's no ability to have it connected, because the baby arrives pretty much waiting for the environment to shape and to wire what needs to be wired for that child to live in this particular culture that they're going to live in, and this particular family, and this particular language. And so when a baby's born, they're really just wired for survival, and they are going to let you know pretty quickly when they're feeling unsafe, and they're going to have a fight or flight response. And that is going to evoke emotion, and then that's when they're crying. It's that something doesn't feel right, whether it's coming from the outside and they get scared, or it's coming from the inside and they're hungry, or they're growing, or something doesn't feel well. That's when you get a lot of that scared, big behavior in a baby. And then what happens is this middle brain, this limbic system, starts to really develop, and that starts to wire, and that's when you get a lot of eye contact and a lot of connection, and that's when the baby starts to really trust that the caregivers are going to meet their needs if they're met consistently throughout time. And then at about 9 months or so, this neocortex really starts to kick in, and the baby's inner being, the part of them that's just saying, I need to grow, I need to thrive, that part is really starting to connect, and they're getting excited to understand the environment that they're in. So what you want to get is that in the first several years of life, they're working really hard to wire this part of the brain, and that's their human part, and that's language and creativity and art and music and all the cool stuff. But really what happens is, as their system gets overwhelmed and they take in lots of input, it's easy for that part of the brain to flip and not be available to them. And then you've got this little emotional animal, or this little reptile, who's in fight or flight. And so when they're in this human brain, that's when you want to really give them good information and teach them the lessons that you want them to learn. That's the brain that can receive language and talking. I call that the go brain, and that's the green brain. And that part of the brain is all about learning and taking in information and learning the rules and trying new things. But as soon as they're not in this part of the brain, we really need to learn that this part of the brain just wants basically us to get slow and low and to empathize and then zip it, because it can't handle a lot of language. There's no language in here. When a child's overwhelmed and whiny and cranky, it's not a good time to engage with them on a rational level because they're not in the part of their brain that can handle that. And what you'll end up doing is overwhelming them more and potentially pushing them down here to their reptile brain. And that's the part of the brain where they're hitting and biting and kicking and screaming. So when they get down here, that's when you just have to really try to get everybody safe, re-regulate yourself so that you can help them. Because once they're that far gone, it's really hard for them to come back to balance, almost impossible without somebody helping them. And you might need to step away for a moment and collect yourself, or you might need to express your frustration, because the brains are talking, and if they're flipping out, it's real easy for you to go to that place. But as the parent, you have to come back online and really collect yourself and try to help the child come back online. So what you want to get is that this is the part of the brain that you want to talk to and teach them the lessons. This is the part of the brain that you want to get real slow and empathize with. And this is the part of the brain where you just have to get everybody back to balance and empathize so that, or rather regulate, so that you can help them come back online. So thanks.